apologize. I shouldn't have the hammer right by my microphone. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get going. I'll call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 48, House of Commons Standing Committee on Government Operations and Estimates, aka the mighty OGGO. Pursuant to the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, January 18th, 2022, the committee is meeting on the study of the federal government consulting contracts awarded to McKinsey and Company. One of our witnesses is running late with traffic and the snow not getting cleared in Ottawa. So we're going to go to first witness for his opening statement. Hopefully Ms. Carr will be here in time for her statement. We welcome back Mr. Sean Boots. Mr. Boots, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement, please. And sorry, before you start, committee, just letting everyone know, probably about 15, 20 minutes I need in the second hour just to do some housekeeping work.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all of you for having me here. It's nice to be back. Professor Clark and I were here in November as part of...
Mr. Boots, I apologize.
No problem.
I have to interrupt you for a moment. Just another housekeeping item. Just so everyone is aware, all the witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting, and let's make sure our valued interpreters are looked after. Sorry about that. Mr. Boots, I apologize. If you want to start from the top, please.
All good. Thanks so much. Really appreciate it. And yeah, nice to be back. Professor Clark and I, like you mentioned, we're here in November as part of the committee's study into ArriveCAN. I think it's safe to say that when we started this research last spring, I don't think we expected it to attract this level of attention. Last year, Professor Clark and I worked together on a research project on federal government contract spending. For today's discussion, there's two angles of that stand out. One, kind of on a micro level, is transparency and data quality in government contract disclosures. And the second, on a macro level, is sort of what this means for public sector capacity and patterns of dependency on large consulting firms. Talking about transparency and data quality, the main theme is that it's hard to understand at a government-wide scale where money is being spent and which vendors are the most prominent. Our research focused on the government's proactive disclosure of contracts dataset, which is all publicly available open data. It's a really valuable dataset, but there's a few reasons why it's hard to interpret at a glance. The names of vendors aren't consistent, and there aren't any business numbers or other unique identifiers. Amendments to contracts aren't always associated consistently with their original contracts. For multi-year contracts, there isn't any data on how much money is spent per year. And for many of the contract entries, there aren't descriptions that would allow us to clearly associate the contract with a specific project or initiative, or to easily differentiate different kinds of professional services work. In our case, our research team spent several months cleaning and analyzing this data, and we published our results and methodology online at govcanadacontracts.ca. Two things to note, and this is really more for the researchers in the room. If you're looking at the numbers on the website, for government-wide totals, you can use the All Departments and Agencies tab near the top of the page. And if you're comparing numbers from year to year, I'd recommend using inflation-adjusted totals. You can find those in the associated CSV files if you click the View Source Data link below each table. Even after the data cleaning that we did, it's hard to tell from the publicly available data what a given contract was for. That's especially true for management consulting firms who provide a very wide range of services to government departments. In the data, a contract might simply be described as management consulting, and that could be strategic advice work, it could be IT implementation, it might be subcontracting a different, more specialized vendor. It's hard to tell what work was involved, let alone how successfully the project turned out or not. There's a lot that other countries have done to improve the quality of their public contract disclosures. The biggest would be to adopt the Open Contracting Data Standard that lets the public follow spending in detail from initial RFPs all the way to the conclusion of the contract. That's the micro level. At the macro level, a lot of this is a reflection of public service capacity or perceived lack of it, and the ways that management consulting firms fill that gap. Looking at the data year by year, what stood out very early on was how significantly spending on management consulting firms has increased over time. Management consulting firms feature prominently in both the professional services and information technology categories of our analysis. Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and Accenture are the largest of these by total dollars spent. In the 2021-2022 fiscal year, these companies received an estimated $172 million, $115 million, and $94 million respectively. That's much more per year than 4 or 5 years ago, which you can see from the data tables on the website. From the descriptions that are available, a lot of the contracts with these firms are focused on IT or IT adjacent work. That could be implementing a large IT or service delivery project, process automation, digital transformation advice, project oversight, and so on. The large growth in spending on these firms, in many cases, is the result of an increased recognition that departments have fallen behind in IT capacity compared to public and political expectations. And instead of being able to build capacity in-house, they've expanded the amount of work done externally by management consultants and other large IT firms. Two tendencies that you can observe from this are, one, management consulting firms will often be hired to prepare project management and procurement plans for major projects. Even if the same firms aren't bidding on the subsequent projects, you could reasonably assume that it gives them detailed insights into how departments assess and evaluate bids. The second is that, especially for large IT projects, one management consulting firm might be hired to oversee the work of another management consulting firm or major IT firm, like IBM or CGI, and that can lead to a set of dynamics where each firm isn't necessarily motivated to hold the other to account, given that their positions will likely be reversed on other future projects. Looking at the literature, the trend we can see worldwide is that management consulting firms have dramatically expanded their IT implementation divisions, given how profitable this work is, and their existing relationships from audit and strategic advice work give them a competitive advantage in winning IT and digital services contracts. This reliance on management consultants becomes a self-reinforcing cycle, and there's a few reasons why that happens, and the capacity of the public service degrades over time as a result. Other countries are having important conversations about state capacity or the effectiveness of their public institutions, often in response to similar situations. In my experience, departments depending heavily on management consultants is a reflection of structural challenges within the public service, like a lack of effective feedback loops, a rigid adherence to existing processes, and a lack of in-house technical capacity and expertise. I'd hope that this can spark more discussions on public service reform and improving how we work. It's a conversation that's really worth having. I'll leave it to Professor Clark once she arrives, hopefully, to discuss some of these trends in more detail. Thanks for having me here, and happy to answer your questions.
Thanks, Mr. Boots. And yes, Professor Clark is here. Welcome back. Welcome back to OGGO. You have 5 minutes, please.
It's great to be here. Thanks a lot for inviting me back, and I'm really excited to see you continuing to look at this issue. So I'm an associate professor at Carleton University School of Public Policy and Administration. By way of context, I've been researching public administration in Canada and internationally since about 2010, and so my perspective on the issue of management consultants in the federal government is a product of the data tool that Mr. Boots just presented, which I helped launch, but also research interviews with public servants where I have them explain to me in their own language, like what does it look like on the ground when you're working in government. And this happens at all levels of authority across all departments and central agencies and line agencies. And I'll say that they're pretty illuminating when you hear directly from public servants how they see this particular issue playing out. And I think it's good that you're spending time on it because it's definitely something that concerns a lot of public servants. So I think looking through the transcripts of your first meeting, there's obviously a lot of questions before you. The one that I want to focus on is the one that I think is the most important, which is, do the federal government's contracts with managing consulting firms betray principles of responsible public administration? And if so, what should be done to prevent this going forward? So on the first part, yes, absolutely. My research suggested in a number of ways the federal public service breaches acceptable best practice in responsible public administration when it contracts with large management consulting firms. And there's three main issues that come up generally. First is questionable value for money. Second is clear breaches of reasonably sort of expected standards of public accountability. And the third is the hollowing of state capacity. And I can elaborate more on each of those in the questions, but I think actually the media and frankly the long-standing literature on this topic does a really good job of diagnosing that problem. There's really no debate about whether that problem exists. So what I think I want to focus on in my opening remarks is what I think the solutions are. And I think there's a lot that this committee could do that would help solve this problem. There's also routes you could go and recommendations that would actually make the problem worse. So I'll try to flag those as well. So in terms of what we need to do to fix this, the first, and this speaks to the comments that Mr. Boots just gave, is really focusing on the data. It's really impossible to do your jobs, frankly, given the low quality of the data we have describing management consulting firms, what they're actually working on, what they produce, whether it has value, and to track the contracts over time. And you got a little bit of a taste of that in your study of the ArriveCAN app and trying to follow the paper trail there. But I think there's lots of models we can look to internationally, and as long as there's some money on the table, and by that I mean like we actually have to hire people in government and say that this is your job to make this data good and release it and work with the stakeholders, as opposed to just it being like an add-on. And that often happens with these kinds of data projects is like there's a demand for more data and then there's no resources for public servants to actually generate it and produce it and share it. So that's the first thing. Second, as I'd say for IT projects specifically, I think there's a lot, which is a huge chunk of the amount of money the federal government spends on management consultants. There's some best practices around capping contract size and recruiting more IT talent in order to be smarter, more kind of skeptical shoppers of some of these products and services. And we actually elaborate on that in the report that we tabled to you last time when we spoke on ArriveCan. So I won't get too much into that, but happy to discuss it more as well. And then third, I think this is the most important thing, is this issue of like spending a lot of money on management consultants and seeing a lot of core public service work being done by management consultants is not kind of an accident. It's an inevitable dynamic of a public service that has both has both suffered from a lack of investment in kind of talent and recruitment and reforming HR practices to make it easier to bring people in, but also that I think over the years has suffered from unhelpful oversight and reporting burdens and a kind of error-free gotcha mentality and a lot of scrutiny that the demands for error-free government make it very difficult to be creative and innovative in the public service. And I think also sort of in tandem with that, when you see a lot of the important work that you care about being outsourced to management consultants, it's clearly bad for morale and doesn't motivate the workforce. So I think saying, like, we need to reform the civil service is perhaps maybe sounds large and daunting and not specific enough, but I think it's actually not as hard as we think. We can go, there's many jurisdictions globally who are facing the exact same problems that the federal government is, and they're taking action. They've already kind of experimented with different solutions, and so we can turn to those countries for examples of what needs to be done. We don't need to spend a lot of time diagnosing the problem either, because there's pretty much consensus across anyone who's ever studied Canadian public administration and most public servants what the issues are. You know, organization is too siloed. There are too many unhelpful rules and processes. I think if you want like a nice testimony of it, one document that I really like is the 2016 Internal Red Tape Reduction Report that a group of public servants prepared. I invite you to look in particular at some of the snapshots of internal red tape that they describe. And when you read about what it takes to try to do anything in the federal government today, you can understand why it's hard to be creative and innovative, and why it might be that an incoming government quickly turns to a management consultant who promises a fast solution. But those fast solutions don't tend to be good value for money, and that's where I think, and they also happen in secret, and that's what we should be worried about. The last thing I'll say is that in proposing solutions, the committee and I think the government really needs to avoid adding too many new rules or processes or onerous reporting requirements in order to try to make it in the name of accountability. This is what we've seen historically, and it actually has this issue of like this effect of further eroding public servants' abilities to do the work that you want them to do, because they spend a lot more time filling out those forms and running complex procurement processes. And it also has the effect of making it difficult for smaller and perhaps more innovative, or at least a broader range of firms to bid for government work, because really complicated procurement processes take teams of people to bid for, and small firms just don't have that. So I'll leave it there and look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Clark. We'll start with Mrs. Kusi for 6 minutes, but before we do, I want to welcome in person our brand new clerk, Amy Belmore. Welcome, Madam Clerk. And Mrs. Kusi for 6.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome, Clerk, and thank you to Ms. Clark and Mr. Boots for being here today. Ms. Clark, through your data that you've collected, what do you think is the main reason why we've seen such large increases in contracts with one consulting firm in particular, McKinsey & Company?
So you're right. The data that we present that I think you have available to you, but that I can share as well, shows that, McKinsey by far has the highest kind of rate of growth across between 2017 and 2021 when we were looking at the data. But the overall amount spent on McKinsey is much smaller than a number of other firms. Why has it grown so much? I mean, I can't speculate. I really don't know. It might be that there's a kind of... I mean, it's possible that the data is actually not that strong from the baseline point that we have. Like, that's something we've mused about, is why is it such a small amount in 2017? So there might be data entry errors there, or it could just be that year they didn't happen to get a lot of contracts, so it looks like a lot, but it's actually not a huge change. But yeah, I would say that it's interesting when I speak with public servants about the firms they're worried about, they very rarely say McKinsey. More often, I mean, and it depends on the case, but it's Deloitte, PricewaterhouseCoopers comes up a lot, Accenture, some of the big IT firms that basically act like management consulting firms now, like IBM is another one that comes up a lot. But as to the growth for McKinsey, I haven't seen any reliable evidence to suggest why that's the case.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. The $101.4 million awarded to McKinsey, and that is the amount that we know today, since the Prime Minister would not give us an amount in question period, under the Liberal government, 20 out of 23 were sole source contracts. A journalist did challenge me on that, but when 18 out of the 23 are pulled from a national standing list, this means that they were selected without a competitive bid. So those 20 out of 23 were sole source contracts. What procurement reforms do you, in your opinion, need to happen to ensure that government isn't handing out sole source contracts to friends and contacts and insiders?
Yeah, so on sole source contracts, definitely there's very few people who would recommend that as best practice for responsible stewardship of public funds, and it doesn't tend to come up as the kind of the go-to model for how to issue these contracts. I think in any given case, the process that you follow, whether it's like a full and open process or whether you have kind of standing offers ready to go, I mean, it's always a balancing act, of course, between the need for resilience and responsiveness and being able to contract quickly. And then also, of course, having processes in place to make sure that it's competitive and accountable and transparent. So some of the specific reforms that I can speak to around procurement that I'd love to see, one comes back to the data question, but if we followed something like the open contracting data standard that Mr. Boots mentioned, we'd be able to follow these contracts through each stage and also really scrutinize what gets delivered. That's a huge issue, right? Never mind how competitive it was in the beginning, but a lot of these firms, the reports they produce, the analysis that's provided, the products, it never sees the light of day for us as outsiders. So it's really hard to know and call it out, and then hopefully institute better practices to not contract with those firms again. So that's one thing, is just a big emphasis on better data and better disclosure of kind of contract outputs would be a big one to help resolve some of these issues. Another procurement reform that I'd like to see is really looking at the size of contracts, and this applies especially to software projects. But I think in general, if you have smaller contracts, you're not as locked in, and you can keep firms better to account. So that would be another a big one. I think there should be more of an investigation and possibly rules introduced around the fluidity between senior leadership roles in the federal government and then positions within these firms. It's pretty common, especially in the IT space, to see someone move from a kind of senior digital or IT role, especially in a CIO sort of function, and then see that sashay into a second career at Deloitte or Accenture. That's a pretty common pattern that I've seen, to the point that it almost becomes laughable. You're like, oh, there goes another one. So I think and what are they doing there? Obviously, they're rallying their contacts, and they understand how the processes work in government. And on one level, there's nothing wrong with that, and we should encourage more interchange between the private and public sectors. I'm not against that in principle, but there is something concerning as a citizen, but also as a researcher of public administration, to see people with that kind of influence. Sorry, Siri's trying to talk to me. Having and then being able to drum up this business, right? The other thing that happens is the other way. So you'll get people from these firms seconded in to help lead a project in government, and they're given government email addresses, security clearances. I mean, some of that's just practicalities, they need to be able to access the system, and that's how we've set it up. But also, it's not obvious. I've had a number of public servants tell me that sometimes they're sitting in a room and they're developing a new service or launching some kind of transformation strategy or developing advice for the minister, and they don't know. It's not always obvious who's a consultant and who's a public servant. And I mean, yeah, we should be concerned about that, because public servants have as their mission creating public value, and we also subject them to a lot of rules around, values and ethics, bilingualism, loyalty to the crown, all these things that, a management consultant, their job is to produce profit, right? So we should know who they are when they're in the room with public servants. It should be really obvious that they have a different set of values and drivers, justifiably. Corporations a corporation, but like I don't think we want them pretending to be public servants, right? That's another reform. I mean, what would that look like in practice? We'd have to have some rules about how we second these people into government and balance that with the risk of making it so hard that you never see that fluid interchange, which we also want to avoid.
I'm afraid I have to cut you off.
Yeah, sorry,
there.
that's a long
We're
answer,
out of
but
time. Thanks very much. Mr. Housefather, please.
Thank you very much to you, Ms. Clark and Mr. Boots, for being here again. Always a pleasure to see you. And I think, just like the last time, you've offered a lot of very compelling testimony related to the larger question of outsourcing, where we have a different study that we already had in place dealing with outsourcing and whether or not we're outsourcing too much, for example, to management consultants, whether or not we should be improving our Treasury Board guidelines and procurement practices. How could we better have data available to everybody? And all of your testimony is perfect for that other study. But as you know, this study, which we got called back urgently to a meeting specially to pass a couple weeks ago during the Christmas break, is about McKinsey. So let me just ask you about McKinsey. Ms. Clark, do you have any non-public information you'd like to share with the committee about McKinsey or about the contracts with McKinsey today?
no.
Fair enough. Mr. Boots, do you have any non-public information you'd like to share with the committee about McKinsey today?
Also, no.
Ms. Clark, were you involved in the negotiation of any of the contracts between the Government of Canada and McKinsey? Mr. Boots, were you involved in these negotiations? Ms. Clark, were you involved in administering any of the contracts between McKinsey and the government, or have any non-public information regarding how they were administered?
No.
Mr. Boots, same question to you. Do you have any non-public information regarding the management of those contracts? Because the study that we passed, and again, not your fault at all, is that we undertake a study regarding government consulting contracts awarded to McKinsey and Company by the Government of Canada or any Crown corporation since November 2015, examining their effectiveness, management, and operation, including the value and service received by the government. But it would seem to me that you would be unable, and I would right now, to be able to distinguish the value received from contracts with McKinsey with the value received from contracts with Deloitte or the value of any other management consultant, because you don't have the specifics related to each of those contracts right now. Would that be correct, Ms. Clark?
Yeah, for sure.
And Mr. Boots, would that be correct as well?
Same here.
Thank you. So while I take your testimony really importantly with respect to our other study, and I think you're very valuable witnesses, and I learn a lot from you with respect to that, particularly as I mentioned to you, Ms. Clark, that article you wrote, I think, was fascinating and really, I think, very compelling. I don't think in the position you're in today on this study, you're able to actually give anything on what we're really supposed to be looking at relating to McKinsey. Let me ask one last question. I think you already stated in your answer to Ms. Cusi, do you have any reason to believe that the contracts provided to McKinsey were done in any different way than the contracts to any other management consulting company by the Government of Canada?
No.
Thank you. Mr. Boots? Then I don't think I have anything more to ask. I'm going to surrender back my time, Mr. Chair. You can go on to the block.
Thanks, Mr. Housefather. Mrs. Vinola.
Thank you very much. Ms. Clark, Mr. Boots, thank you very much for being here. I'm very aware of the fact that you can't get into the details of the contracts with McKinsey because neither you or I have them yet. We hope to have them soon. But your answers will allow some light to be shed on the process and to the ways in which the processes can be improved in the public service and how we can improve the expertise of our public servants. Ms. Clark, Mr. Boots, you can chime in. I'd just like to ask you, according to your research and the studies you've done, have you noted that public servants understand, recognize the competencies that exist within their teams?
So do public servants recognize their own competencies within in-house? That's sort of the question? Yeah.
The managers. I'm really, thinking in terms of the managers and the senior managers. Do they recognize the competency of their employees?
That's such a good question. So I think, it's tricky because obviously I don't want to comment on every manager in the federal government because, I mean, that would be impossible. But in general, I see sort of two things going on. A smaller group of public servants is, I think, more aware of what could be done in-house and excited to do it and quite capable and has enabling managers who want to do it. But the system around them makes it very difficult because we have mired public servants in a literally incomprehensible web of rules and perceived rules. And I really do encourage you to spend a bit of time on the Treasury Board suite of policies. It is shocking how deep you can get into like layers of bullet points that, of course, this would be disabling to anybody, right? So there's that. And then I do think that you touch on an important point, though, is that there's a question of if over time we have a generation, perhaps, of public servants who become so used to leaning on outside players for some of this core public service work, especially in the IT space, but I think more broadly, that they see themselves perhaps as more like contract managers than actually doing the work themselves. And I don't think that anybody would say that they don't think their team is capable of delivering. And I certainly haven't met any public servant that's really excited about the quality of the work they'd get from a management consultant over what their team could provide. But I think there's a pretty good recognition that it's hard to deliver at the speed that some of the issues of today demand, and also to be creative and innovative given the density of rules and processes weighing on a team.
When a consultant, whether it's McKinsey or another firm, as you said earlier, when they are hired or when they come to work, we don't really know who's the public servant, who is the consultant. But for whom is it profitable when you have an outside consultant that is developing expertise?
The situations where it makes sense to bring in outside expertise are sometimes public servants will say, like for surge capacity. So if there's a sudden need for talent and you can't in particular hire it up, or it might not make sense to build a permanent team, it can be smart to work with outside players. Sometimes there's very specific expertise that you don't have on hand, and so leaning on outsiders for that is, I think, actually should be encouraged, right? Like, we don't want an insular public service that presumes to have a monopoly on knowledge. Where it becomes more problematic is when, I think, bigger questions around sort of the strategy of public management or how a program is designed and who it serves, multi-year kind of like transformation strategies are another area where a lot of these firms get really involved. And I don't think that they actually, from what I've seen, are producing much of substance, but also I think those are the kinds of things that should, I would say, be treated as kind of core public service work.
Merci.
Thank you. I'm looking here at a contract that was let with McKinsey, an open contract for professional services in information technology, began in 2019 and ended in the end of January 2000. Oh, I'm sorry. What would justify a contract like I have before me, this open contract, for the next 81 years? Well, how can you justify a contract like that if it's a contract of 81 years? Why would you not build a team of public servants? What justifies that?
I don't know the specific contract, but certainly this idea of having open contracts over, well, in this case, 81 years, yeah, it seems outrageous. And I think this is where you have to kind of ask, like, what is the point of having a civil service, right? Our model is predicated on this idea of a kind of a permanent, merit-based, neutral public service who provides kind of continuity of service and corporate knowledge across different administrations, where ministers are supposed to be able to turn for frank advice and loyal implementation. Like, this is at the core of our Westminster model. And so when you start to see things like this, like an open contract to kind of dip into external advice as and when needed, I mean, the justification was probably that you want to be able to get that quickly, and that if you can create this kind of an open contract, you don't have to keep going back through the process. And I do think that you encourage that, actually, with how convoluted the process has become. And that's another reason why part of fixing this mess is going to be really streamlining the rules around how contracts are given. And I think streamlining is key. It's not adding new rules, because new rules are going to make it even harder and encourage this kind of activity of, well, let's create standing offers, let's have open contracts that are kind of non.
I'm sorry, I must interrupt again.
Yeah.
That's our time. Mr. Johns for 6 minutes, please.
Thanks. Super appreciate you both being back here. Now, when did maybe you can give me some history on this. Like, when did outsourcing just really take off? I mean, we're looking at McKinsey. You talked about Deloitte, right? Should we be studying Deloitte? Are they also out of control in terms of outsourcing and getting private contracts? Can you speak about the history? When did this really get going?
I mean, so management consultants have always played a pretty big role in public administrations globally, with some variation. Canada has a really interesting history of having worked with management consultants early on in some of the first government reform exercises in the 60s, right around like.
Just like really.
Oh, okay.
Like we're in McKinsey,
Yeah.
we're seeing this exploding amount. Was there like a company under the Conservative government that they favored that took off as well? Was there anything that we should be, looking at and examining?
Yeah, I mean, most of this kind of rampant outsourcing and coupled with kind of systematic neglect or underinvestment in the state really gets going in the 80s in most jurisdictions and in Canada as well. But I also think that, it's like that was the kind of age of outsourcing, but and it's continued since. But I mean, management consultants have kind of always been around across any different, administration. I think it's pretty politically neutral in that sense. Yeah.
It's like McKinsey, they went from $2 million under the Conservative government. Now, we're up to $100 million, right?
Yeah.
Plus. Is there any other company that is been outsourcing, in favor with the government that should be examined as well as McKinsey?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate that there's particular dynamics, but that have led to this specific focus on McKinsey. But in my opinion, I don't think it makes sense to focus on McKinsey.
Should this committee be studying Deloitte and contracts with Deloitte?
I think the focus on outsourcing and contracting in the federal government is the broad enough umbrella to get at these issues. And any given firm, it's not going to lead to a useful outcome, right? Because if we solve for McKinsey by creating a bunch of rules, you're still going to have a position where management consultants are largely doing the work of government in ways that are unaccountable and that have very little value for money. I don't think it's going to solve that problem.
Do you think if there was strong whistleblowing laws in Canada that this would help curb some of this outsourcing, that public servants would be able to come forward and raise alarms when they see contracts explode like this, that they have concerns about within the public service?
I think that the focus on whistleblowing would imply that it's more of that in each of these cases it's a really obvious, like, sensationalist breach of kind of good governance. And it's actually more of a slow burn, and sometimes it's more subtle. And so I think public servants whistleblowing, like, the things that they're not going to whistleblow about the fact that one of their colleagues has a government email address and works for Deloitte, and it's not really obvious. It's not a really great story. It doesn't sell. But I think over time, this is like the bigger erosion of state capacity is what this committee has the opportunity to address, and that's what the focus should be. Is I think McKinsey is like a bit of a distraction, if I'm being honest, from the real issue.
Okay. Now, you in 2016, you wrote an article about the paradox that the federal government is caught in around the fear of failure and the need to innovate. Now, I'm wondering if you can reflect on the role that institutional knowledge has in the ability of a federal government to innovate, and whether or not it's beneficial for certain jobs or tasks to be carried out by a third party outside of government. It seems to me that a government can't innovate when the role of innovation is being outsourced, or can't learn from failure when that failure is burdened by a private company. Do you have any thoughts on this paradox and how it relates to McKinsey and the contracts it receives?
Yeah. So the research around kind of sclerosis and barriers to innovation in the federal government, almost like universally, when you ask public servants why this is something that the federal government complains a lot about, like, it's pretty common. You can find quotes from the clerk going back decades commenting on this specific issue, that we have a federal public service that is riddled with risk aversion, and that undercuts innovation. And where I think it plays into the consulting piece is that when you're stuck in that, as I said earlier, when you're stuck in that kind of a environment, it's hard to be responsive and innovative and to really encourage and enable your team. And so that's sometimes why management consultants get turned to. But I think the more you, it's like this vicious cycle, right? Because then as you rely on these management consultants, you don't do the hard work of actually investigating, like, why is our public service not capable of delivering this? And the point around risk aversion and explosions of accountability that actually undermine accountability, that's like a key one to really address. And I think parliamentarians play a big role in that because in some cases, in many cases, public servants will say the reason that we act this way, the reason we're so risk averse is because we don't have an enabling environment to try new things and make mistakes and learn along the way. And it's impossible to be innovative in that context. And so media, academics, parliamentarians, all outside scrutineers of government, I think, have a role to play in being critical and investigating failure in government, but also maybe creating a bit more space for public servants to experiment. And that's not something we really tolerate in our political culture. It's not true in other cases. I've spoken to public servants in other jurisdictions who do not feel the same way.
I'm going to lead into the ownership piece because outsourcing of risk and innovation comes with the outsourcing of ownership and development too. It seems to me that the same stagnation would also apply to the development and resources of our public service. Can you maybe speak about the intellectual property rights and the ability for departments to share resources as these relate to outsourced contracts like McKinsey?
And I'm afraid you only have about 10 seconds.
Okay, sure. I mean, basically to say that, yes, the issue of IP and data ownership whenever you contract out is a really important one. And in a number of cases, governments are finding themselves buying back data from firms they contract with, especially for service delivery. So it's like a twofer for the firm. And yeah, so that's a good point to raise and happy to discuss it more when I have more minutes.
I'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. Mr. Barrett, please, for 5.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks to both the witnesses for being here today. Professor Clark, in your research, have you found an example of a company receiving a 50-fold increase in contracts received by a government, specifically the Government of Canada, over a term of less than 8 years, while the principal of that organization is a close friend of the head of government, in this case, the Prime Minister?
Yeah, no, I've never seen that before. I haven't really been looking for it, to be fair, but no, I've never seen that before.
Yeah, and interesting that you point out that you haven't seen it, you haven't been looking for it. This issue came to light through reports in the media. There's also been efforts undertaken by journalists around the world with respect to McKinsey specifically. Do you know of, or have you read reports of some of the other firms that you mentioned, PricewaterhouseCoopers, IBM, KPMG, holding corporate retreats within a couple thousand meters of a concentration camp? Are you familiar with examples of that?
No, and so I think, like to your point, when I was going through the focus of the study, there is a I said earlier that McKinsey was a distraction, but I should clarify on the issue of like how to make the public service more resilient and to better manage procurement. I think focus on McKinsey can be distracting, but there is an interesting policy question around. At what point does a firm's broader ethical behavior and kind of values mean that they're just like a no-go zone? Do we want to start developing rules around that? And I mean, I'm not an expert on McKinsey's particular history, but I read the news like everybody. And yeah, there's some really problematic lines on their CV. And so, yeah, it's a legitimate question to say, is that something that the federal government would want to examine? To me, that's a distinct issue, though, from reforming procurement as a larger issue and what I think are the kind of more immediate problems with how we run procurement in Canada.
Do you think that incidents like that, or, for example, McKinsey and the work that they've been documented having done for Purdue Pharma, specifically helping to supercharge opioid sales, the sale of OxyContin, which has ultimately led to the fire that's burning across North America, that is the deadly opioid epidemic. Do you think something like that kind of work, being done by a company that is now a $100 million+ supplier or contractor for the federal government, do you think that association undermines or risks undermining public confidence in the public service?
I mean, I can't say, and I think that that's an eminently studyable question. We could do some public opinion research to see how the McKinsey contracts are changing public opinion toward the state. Yeah, but I would just be offering opinion at that point. I mean, I don't know if the extent to which Canadians are paying attention or that it's eroding trust.
Right. And of course, with respect to the extent Canadians are paying attention, there seems to be quite a bit of public interest. as has been evidenced by the amount of ink spilled by the press. Though you haven't likely been looking for it, in your research, have you found any examples of a company, of any other management company, that saw a 50-fold increase in the amount of money that they were receiving from the federal government in contracts after driving the immigration policy for the Trump administration in the United States? Is that something that you've observed over the last 8 years?
No.
No. I guess the concern that I have specifically with Mr. Housefather's line of questioning is that we have an opportunity here to get some analysis on the impacts of these types of contracts and what they have on the federal government, and you're certainly an expert in that. But these observations that I'm discussing with you are so important, because the type of company that McKinsey is exactly the type of company that Canadians wouldn't choose to do business with in their personal life. And I've listed a couple examples. McKinsey's work helping the Saudi government track people who are political opponents of theirs, and then targeting their family and exacting punishments on them. So my concerns, why we're talking about McKinsey today, Chair, is because of the type of company they are, the type of country we are, and the risk to damage to brand Canada that they do.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Barrett. Ms. Thompson for 5, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome back to committee, Dr. Clark and Mr. Boots. I want to start with a couple of articles that go back a number of years. One, November 2013. Begin in the middle of the article. Over the past 3 years, Deloitte has received almost $53 million in federal government contracts that are worth $100,000 or more, and in excess of $135 million in major contracts since the Harper government came to power. Shows a review of recently tabled public accounts conducted by Post Media News. Contracts valued at less than $100,000 are not individually broken down in annual public accounts. And then another article from September 2011, the Harper government defended paying almost $90,000 a day to a big consulting firm for advice on how to save money, saying it can't do the job properly by itself. The fact is, and this is in quotes, that we feel we need to have outside advice. Finance Minister Jim Flaherty said Tuesday. It isn't, continuing the quote, it isn't good, quite frankly, for government to just look at itself. There's a lot of expertise in Canada on the subject of public sector productivity, for example, and we need to look forward to having the advice of, in this case, Deloitte's. The Canadian Press reported earlier that Deloitte was hired August 15th on a $19.8 million contract to advise the federal cabinet and senior officials on finding enough savings to balance the books by 2014. I realize that we have an outsourcing study underway, so I really feel that information sits there. In light of the McKinsey study today, federal spending consulting contracts awarded to McKinsey rose in 2020, 2021 relative to other years, and the increase is likely related, at least in part, to pandemic-related services. Relative to McKinsey in this study rather than the outsourcing, which I believe is very important for us to look at. Could you provide information around the McKinsey contracts of 2020, 2021?
I can't. No.
Thank you. And Mr. Boots, I'm really interested in your comments around transparency and data quality, and I agree. I think it's incredibly important. And again, to the outsourcing study, I think it's something that we have to look at, obviously, in great depth. But for this study, can you speak to transparency, data quality in relation to the McKinsey contracts?
Yeah, I can't speak specifically to the McKinsey contracts. The only thing I think I would note is that to the credit of the open data team that publishes the proactive disclosure of contracts data, the quality of data included in the data set actually really increases around 2017, 2018. And that's why that was sort of like the early boundary of the time period that we looked in our research. There's sort of scattered historical data from before that point, but it's hard for us to analyze that, given that that's when the data gets good. And so that's where we started.
But I'm trying
sort
to
of
not
plan plan.
duplicate the study. So in relation to McKinsey, right, is there anything specific around the McKinsey contracts on transparency or data quality?
No, nothing specific to McKinsey in our research.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'll pass on the rest of my time. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ms. Thompson. Ms. Vinola for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Boots, in the contracts, one of the clauses that is indicated for a sole source contract is that the company has exclusive rights. Is it frequent for a company to have exclusive rights for the work that it does for the population? That is a very good question. It can be indicated whether or not the intellectual property that is being held by the company or by the government. It was added to open contract data in recent years. And so it's difficult to say everywhere. But in most cases, it is normally held by the company. There is, of course, a process of exemptions where it could be held by the other party. But it is difficult, and it is one of the things that we have come across in our research and reporting. There's a contract, EM 5370 ET-33-001. It's an 81-year contract. This contract, when you look at it, is on a site that tells us how much taxpayers have paid for this contract. $0. Say, it's marvelous on the long term, is it not? It is really the goal of a statesperson. But $0? Is there a problem there? And if so, how can we make the taxpayer aware of what the real cost of this type of contract would be at the end of the line?
Would you be able to provide that in writing to the committee, please? Thanks very much.
No
Mr. Johns for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. Ms. Clark, back to the issue of intellectual property and sharing knowledge and resources between departments. Now, can you talk about what has been happening with the federal government paying to use or develop a service, then having to pay for it over and over again, whether that's for leasing or another agency to use it, whatever it might be? Sounds like a whole lot of taxpayers' dollars being thrown out the window. What would happen differently if that service were developed for and by the public service?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things there. One is that, in particular, whenever firms are contracted in to develop kind of digital systems or any kind of citizen-facing digital interface, there's always opportunity for lots of data to be collected that, in some cases would have privacy questions, but also that has a lot of value potentially to improve the policy process, make government work more smartly, et cetera. And so there have been cases, and I don't know how much this happens across the federal government, but it can happen that in these contracts you don't specify that data that's produced is then owned by government, and so there have been instances of governments buying this back. So that's one issue. And then the second point that you raise around basically being able to repurpose a service that you procure. I mean, we would all assume that that's happening, right? Like if you were running your own business and you paid for some piece of advice or some service that you could use in different lines of your business, you would do that because you'd be like, sweet, but it doesn't happen often in government for a few reasons. One is that the contract might specify that it can't, but more often I think it's because departments aren't talking to each other. And so it's quite likely, and I have heard anecdotally that, and if we had more data on what these contracts were, I think we'd see that in many cases, departments and units within the same department are paying for the same thing over and over from the same firms. And
it sounds outrageous to me. Can you also talk about the risks Canadians' privacy, about Canadians' privacy when government outsources IT work that involves, their very personal data?
Yeah, I mean, in some cases the firms you're working with will have best in practice kind of security and privacy measures in place, so it's not necessarily a problem. And this has long-standing been a challenge of government relying on non-governmental players for its work, is that just by virtue of developing a product or a service or a strategy, you end up learning a lot about the nature of that program, your users of that program, like what impact it has. And this is, I think, where we start to see the gutting of the state's knowledge, is the more that your relationship with service users or with stakeholders or with your programs is mediated by a contracted party, the less you know about your own operations. And so governments are actually becoming dumber the more they contract, which has this, again, vicious cycle of meaning you contract more because you don't have the knowledge. So, I think it's a genuine concern, and it exists in the IT space, especially because there's a lot of data and information, but it's always been a reality of government outsourcing, whether that's with management consultants or with nonprofits. It's always a real challenge, is how do you close the loop on making sure that any information that is produced through that program that you're outsourcing goes back to the
I'm
kind of
afraid I have to
policy-making
cut you off
center.
again, Professor Clark.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mr. Johns. We have we're suspending at 4:31, so we're going to do 2.5 with Ms. Block and then 2.5 with Mr. Housefather. Go ahead, Ms. Block.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I want to echo my colleagues' comments in welcoming both of you here today. I truly did appreciate the testimony that you provided to us in the past. And I think what's important for the testimony that we're hearing yet again today is the backdrop that it provides for us as a committee to understand the issue around not only outsourcing, but perhaps, as you pointed out, the policy debates we need to have when we do have a flashpoint like McKinsey, where it's in the news that this company has their contracts with our government have increased 50-fold, like my colleagues have said. And so, even if Canadians aren't paying attention, we certainly need to. And we certainly need to dig into that and find out, what is embedded within the rules around procurement, the rules around contracting that not only allow for this reliance on contracting out to management consulting companies, but also what gaps and holes there are in that system that allow for us to contract with a company like McKinsey and to see that kind of growth happen so quickly. Obviously, we've had reports about that. Public servants have also stated publicly, albeit on background, that they were concerned by the work being done. They're not sure what was gained in the department by the work that was being done by these consulting firms, and they didn't know what they actually brought to the table. And so I think that's also concerning to us when public servants start to question why this outsourcing is happening. I think I've heard from you that you think significant reform of contracting rules needs to be undertaken, but not necessarily growing the number of rules and making that more onerous. But you also commented on the fact that there are numerous models internationally for what we might do, where we might look to actually start to try and get this in hand. And I'm wondering if you could just give us some examples, jurisdictions where we could look.
And I'm afraid that's time we'll have to ask you, like Mr. Boots, if you could provide that in writing to the committee. Mr. Housefather for like 30 seconds.
I got 2.5, Mr. Chair, and I'm taking it. First of all, thank you again for being here. Mr. Barrett threw in some remarks in his questions, some assumptions. Ms. Clark, do you know that the Prime Minister is close personal friends with Dominic Barton? Do you have any personal knowledge of that?
I mean, not personal, but I know that. But I haven't like hung out with them.
You know who's going to be here on Wednesday? Dominic Barton, who we could ask that question to. But you're not the one that knows what their relationship is. But you do know in their procurement system, the Prime Minister is not the one that awards contracts, right?
I mean, I don't know what happened in these cases, but no, I mean,
Not
as the
any
rules
chance.
are written and as I've understood the process, it doesn't seem like it's something that most ministers, let alone prime ministers, are paying attention to.
And when we talk about increasing by 50% or by 50 times, if I had a contract with a company for $100 and the next year I had a contract with them for $5,000, what would be the percentage increase?
Sorry, I wasn't.
If I had a contract with a company for $100, I paid them $100 this year,
Yeah.
and next year I paid them $5,000, what would be the percentage increase?
So you're mirroring to the question of McKinsey contracts? Is
Well,
that?
it would be 50%, right?
Yeah,
You would
just
have
trying to-
50 times more from 100 to 5,000.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we have McKinsey gaining about 100 some odd million over 7 years of government. That's not a lot of money for these type of consulting firms in the Government of Canada equation. We may have increased for example, Deloitte's payments by a higher range from 1 year to the next, but that might only be doubling the amount paid to Deloitte versus 50 times, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I do agree that there's something funny about the data and the increase, and I think there's potentially data entry errors or issues around how to cap. And I really want to clarify that. I mean, I think Mr. Boots did a good job of it, but the data that we present shouldn't be taken as like a perfect snapshot because we can only work with what we have. So it's possible that actually the McKinsey contracts were more before. We don't really know that. Yeah.
What I'm saying, for example,
Yeah.
is if I had no contract with Oracle or a tiny contract with Oracle, and then I decided to put in an Oracle system, right? My exponential spending with Oracle would increase drastically, but it wouldn't be unreasonable necessarily. That's why we have to look into it and we need the specifics.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've always said that when we've presented the data around what stands out as a huge percentage increase from McKinsey's contracts over the time period is that it may very well just reflect specific contracts that were given at any given time to those different firms. Yeah.
We'll find out. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much. Mr. Boots and Professor Clark, thank you for joining us again. It was fascinating. I really hope to see you back in OGGO, whether for this or another study. It's been very interesting, so thank you for your time. Colleagues, we're going to suspend for a few minutes so we can bring in our other witnesses virtually. We are suspended. Thank you. We are back. With our new witnesses, again, I'm going to try and about last 15, 20 minutes just for some urgent committee stuff we have to take care of. We'll start with a 5-minute statement from Ms. Carr. Ms. Carr, welcome back, by the way. I think maybe your third. A couple more, you'll get a free coffee with us. But please go ahead for 5 minutes.
We'll hold you to that. Good afternoon, everybody. As mentioned, my name is Jennifer Carr, and I'm the president of the Professional Institute of the Public Service of Canada. Today with me is Jordan McCauley, who is our expert on government outsourcing, who will assist me in answering your questions this afternoon. The Professional Institute represents 72,000 public service professionals across Canada, mostly in the federal jurisdiction. Last October, I testified before this committee. I thank you again for recognizing the Professional Institute as a leading subject matter expert on contracting out. We have prepared several reports on this critical matter, and we are available at any time to discuss our findings with you. Over a year ago, a contract to McKinsey around the Phoenix Pay system also made the news and opened up refreshed questions about the increase in government outsourcing. For years, we have seen the government over-rely on costly outsourcing. McKinsey is just one of the latest examples. To summarize our position, contracted out work impacts the security of the government's IT systems, results in higher costs and lower quality of services to Canadians. It's less transparent, less accountable, and there is a loss of institutional knowledge and skills. And this hurts the ability of the government to recruit and retain the professionals that it needs. Not investing in the public service costs taxpayers more and delivers less. The contracts awarded to McKinsey are not only unnecessary and scandalous given the dubious relevance and the quality of advice they provided, they are actually just the tip of the iceberg. While the present government is rightfully facing criticisms on this issue, it is not a new problem. Previous governments of all stripes have invested ever-increasing amounts on contracting out. Years of unchecked spending on government outsourcing by these various governments has created a shadow public service of consultants and temporary staff operating alongside the government workforce. This shadow public service plays by an entirely different set of rules. They're not hired on merit, representation, fairness, or transparency. They are not subject to budget restraints or hiring freezes, and they are not accountable to the Canadian public. Yet year after year, the federal government continues to make costly decisions on outsourcing. Professional Institute alone has filed over 2,500 grievances where work was outsourced to this shadow public service. To better situate outsourcing to McKinsey into the broader context of the use of consultants in the federal public service, I'd like you to provide you with some key numbers that we want to bring to your attention. I will let Mr. McCauley describe the overall trends.
Thank you, President Carr. Yes, my name is Jordan McCauley. I'm a data analyst at PIPS. I've been working with the proactive disclosure data for at least 5 years now, and I'd like to reiterate some of the things that were said in the last meeting, that there are serious data quality issues. So we're very aware that these are estimates, not precise figures necessarily, but looking at it closely enough, you can definitely identify certain trends. So there's 3 that I'd like to kind of point out within the context of this hearing. So first, as President Carr alluded to, this was a problem going back, far beyond 2015. There were years during the Harper government where spending on consultants, approached $1 billion a year. Specifically, we look at IT consultants, management consultants, and temporary help services. We think those 3 categories of consulting best represent personnel outsourcing, which is what we're most particularly concerned with. I think the second point is that since the Liberal government came in 2015, the problem has gotten worse, and that's despite the commitment by the Prime Minister when he was campaigning to reduce outsourcing spending to 2006 levels. And we see no indication in the data that that was a serious commitment. The spending, especially on IT, has continued to grow each year. Overall, the numbers look like they've roughly doubled between 2015 and 2022 on those three categories of consultants. And then lastly, that this $150 million of contracts that went to McKinsey, although it's great and it's got us here to have this discussion, it's a very small relative to large IT contracts, and I know that was discussed in the last meeting. But a company like IBM, for instance, in 2016, received more than double of what McKinsey did over that 8-year period in a single year, and that's just for IT consultants. So I think looking at the data and what we've been tracking over a number of years now shows that the scope of this problem goes far beyond McKinsey or any one company.
Great.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thank you. Sorry, that's our 5 minutes, I'm afraid, but thank you for your opening comments. And Mr. Macaulay, always a pleasure to have another Macaulay in committee today, even if you spell it wrong. We're going to start with Mrs. Kusi, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much, Ms. Carr and Mr. Macaulay, the other Mr. Macaulay, for being here today. On page 62 of the infamous book When Mackenzie Comes to Town, written by Walt Bogdanich and Michael Forsyth, and I'm sure you'll hear me make reference to it over the coming weeks as we study McKinsey. It states here on page 62, McKinsey burrowed deep into the state and federal agencies by selling the idea that ordinary government workers lack the training and experience to understand the nuances of government. So I think something similar to what Ms. Carr was describing there. I'm now going to go to a CBC article from January 4th, 2023, which indicates that the department that used McKinsey the most is Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada. In this article, two public servants explained that the many policy decisions were decided by McKinsey rather than public servants. They also said that these policy decisions were made without public interest as their top priority. Ms. Carr, what has been the morale of the public service when consulting firms come in and take over projects instead of public servants?
Well, thank you for the question. To be 100% honest, it hurts morale. We have a set of professional people who have been hired for their talents and their skills, and to not be part of the conversation is very damaging, and it runs really deep into the workforce. When their work is outsourced, again, those skills and expertise leave the public service when the contract ends, and basically that means that the outsourcing is much, much higher in cost rather than just dollars and cents. We lose accountability. We erode the capacity of our workers to work with those systems, and we hurt the ability to retain our staff.
Consulting firms prioritize what is best for public interests compared to public servants?
Absolutely. I don't believe so. I believe that they are in the business of making money, of being able to have a contract. I believe that some of the contracts are actually written so that they can perpetually have that work. One of the examples I can give you is Phoenix, the pay system outsourced to IBM. Even if my members, very highly skilled IT workers, know how to go in and fix it, we can't because it's a sole source contract and we aren't allowed to go in and make the fixes that we know would be helpful.
And when morale is down in the public service for reasons such as outsourcing to consulting firms like McKinsey, how do you think that impacts the efficiency and the effectiveness of our public service?
So there's many levels to that question. I like to say that it's disheartening for federal public servants to see that their work is being outsourced, and that the government is actually valuing that work by paying the market rate of the service plus markup when they are perpetually being told that they can't meet market rates for public servants. So I won't lie. IT workers walk away from the public service to join contractors because they are getting the respect that they need. They're getting the pay that they deserve, and why wouldn't they? So it's an endless kind of cycle that if we don't break now, will decimate the federal public service.
Something that my leader mentioned in his McKinsey press conference 2 weeks ago was the value for money of having external contractors compared to doing the work internal to the public service. Do you think the government is getting good value for money on the contracts awarded to McKinsey instead of doing the work internally?
I don't think so. I think we have, again, a set of expertise in-house. It would be more prudent for the federal government to invest in those workers, to upskill those workers, to allow them to do the jobs on behalf of Canadians with value for money in mind, and not the perpetual use of contracts and employing and making shares and dividends for the companies.
And you touched on this in your opening statement. What accountability and transparency standards do public servants have to encounter compared to consulting firms?
Values and ethics, disclosure of conflict of interests. They also have to go through gender-based analysis and other kind of, programs to justify the solutions that they come up with. And of course, just the federal public service themselves, they have to, be bilingual. They have to be reflective of the diversity of the nation. They have to have regional distribution. All of these things, a sole source or a big business does not have to meet for working in the federal public service.
And why do you think that the government outsources to companies like McKinsey instead of developing the public service? And you made reference to this again in your opening statement.
A very short answer, please.
Yeah. So the short answer is right now. We need to upgrade our government hiring policies. We need to make sure that they're hired quicker and more efficiently. We have to modernize our IT procurement and invest in our in-house expertise. And we also have to pay for that expertise in-house. Spending 3 or 4 times as much outsourced when we can pay just a relatively good salary and provide that consistent delivery of services and programs that Canadians rely on, ensuring that taxpayer money is received value for money.
Thank you, Ms. Carr. Ms. Kusi. Mr. Kuzmirchuk, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, President Carr and Mr. McCauley, for joining us again here at OGGO and for providing your excellent testimony. And furthermore, thank you to the tremendous public servants that you represent. We've gone through so much the last couple of years, and really thanks to the workers, the public servants that are committed and dedicated that you represent, we were able to get through. Canadians were able to get through the toughest 2 years. And so I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of everyone here around this table for the tremendous work of your members. I wanted to ask you, since about 2015, our government has made tremendous investments in our public service. You look at the fact that we've hired since 2015, since this government took office, we've hired about 60,000 full-time employees in the public service, and which is an investment of roughly $20 billion since 2015, an additional $20 billion, 60,000 full-time employees hired. I wouldn't say that our federal government, that this government is shy about bringing services in-house, nor is it shy about investing in our federal public service. And so I just wanted to ask you for a comment on the fact that, again, we've seen a tremendous growth in the number of full-time employees, public servants, and also we've seen an increased investment in our federal public service.
Yeah, I think we'd have to go and actually look at where those investments have happened. Definitely from the start. We want to make sure that the government fully engages us, with any kind of review of where public services are delivered. We are facing a technological change right now, and we need to make sure that the government engages with its workforce around the rapid changes of the government in the workplace. We also need to be more transparent to Canadians. Definitely the last strategic review that happened when we're talking about large public servants, we led to cross-the-board cuts, and we need to make sure that when we look at where hiring is done, has it been done in a strategic way to meet certain objectives? And I would say the over-reliance on IT consultants is leading to what we say a shadow public service, which is just eroding our capacity to deliver on behalf of Canadians.
And thank you, President Carr. And I can tell you that all of us around the table here are taking your comments to heart. And very seriously, we want to look at outsourcing and how we can improve the systems and strengthen the systems accountability, transparency around our outsourcing processes. I did want to ask you, you point out the growth obviously is a concern in terms of outsourcing, but do you see situations where, can you describe situations where outsourcing makes sense, where some of the skills and expertise that are provided by these outside companies really do complement the work of our excellent federal public service?
Yeah, so I'll echo Professor Clark's message on this, which is there are times when we do need to contract out services, again, surge capacity or for a special purpose. Unfortunately, what I feel happens is that we contract out the whole project instead of the piece where bringing people in to help amplify or to provide that piece that the public service is missing, and sharing that talent or that expertise with our internal people, making sure that the in-house capacity is leveraged as well. So what we tend to do is then leave those contracts in place for the whole project when those people and building that in-house capacity.
Can I interrupt for a sec? You froze for a second. Do you mind repeating the answer, please, Ms. Carr?
Okay, and where to begin?
Last 30 seconds.
The last 30 seconds. Well, what I was saying is that when we contract out, what happens is instead of transferring that knowledge in-house, leveraging the contract to find the deficiencies and improve and upskill the government workers, the contract usually leaves with that piece and leaves us in the same hole that we were in the beginning, instead of creating an upskilled workforce that can take those challenges to the next level.
Thank you so much, President Carr. And you mentioned that we are experiencing a period of extreme disruption, both within Canada and globally as well, too. There's certain forces that are acting upon really the world, whether it's automation, whether it's AI, whether it's cloud computing, whether it's remote work even. All of these forces are coming to bear on the work that we do as a government. Might you think that a global company, for example, like McKinsey, that has 30,000 employees across the world in 65 countries, might it have certain expertise or understanding of best practices that they can share with, for example, our federal public service that we may not have access to because we may not have those day-to-day contacts or those networks that are global? And is there sort of value in that sense in terms of sharing the expertise with a company that, again, is so connected globally?
And I'm afraid maybe a 30-second answer, please.
Yeah, that's fine. I think the answer lies in your question, sharing the expertise. I don't find that they are sharing the expertise. They're coming in to do the work and leave with the work. So there is a difference between coming in to help solve the problem and create a solution that works in-house, and creating an over-reliance on your expertise without adding to the in-house expertise that we need.
Excellent point. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Carr. Mrs. Vinola, please, for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. Ms. Carr, Mr. Macaulay, welcome and thank you for being here today. My first question, well, you've already answered it with respect to the problem that is brought about by using consultants, not just McKinsey, but others that are used as well. You were answering, and if I missed something, tell me. They are not subject to the same ethical standards as the public servants, the same accountability, the same diversity standards, the same inclusion standards. Using consultants, it can be necessary. I know in schools we've had to use the services from outside to recreate that spark of creativity that we seek. But when those consultants don't follow the same rules, is that a way of getting around, of circumventing the rules to reach new ideas? That's my first question. And now with consultants, has your union had received many grievances from public servants? How many? And if so, why?
And, I think what happens with outside consultants is, we'll go back to the morale, is you have a lot of capable people who are able to do the work, but find that they're in a glass ceiling because of language barriers, of regional distribution, and therefore they can't make those barriers. That was one of the good things about a virtual working space is that we could hire talent from across the country in order to fill in those spaces and to create that talent and move that upward into the government. I did mention right now we have 2,500 grievances against the federal public service, against Treasury Board, where we know that the work that the members are doing is work from our members. These are jobs that consultants are doing that could be housed by federal public servants. And we also know that from the CIO that we are 7,000 IT workers short. If we can't even retain and recruit the members and keep the members that we have, we're never going to reach the goal of a self-sufficient federal public service, and our reliance on contracts will just continue to grow.
I'll just continue on with IT. Hiring people in IT is costly and contributes to the erosion of the institutional memory. But you have said that you have a need for some 7,000 new IT workers. Is this something that you will be able to fill? And why is it? Why is it that people maybe would not find the public service stimulating or attractive enough to say, okay, I'm going to hire on to the PS and work there?
Things that are missing. Again, the glass ceiling that happened with regional distribution. There are people who would not be willing to move to the national capital to move up in the ranks. The pay scale is far behind our private counterparts. So you really have to make a decision at the beginning. Phoenix pay system, of course, even if we could hire people in a good job, not knowing that you're going to be able to be paid properly is a huge barrier right now. And, just the fact that the government is more reliant, they have spent more money on outside contracts for IT than internally in-house on their own IT workers. So it's sending a silent message to our workers that you're not valued, that we much rather go outside and get the work done.
Merci.
Thank you. You did mention that there were 2,500 grievances that have been filed by public servants against the government. Of these, how many were based on the use of consultants, and in specific McKinsey, to fill the jobs that they could have filled?
I do that, no. But they are all consultants.
Est-ce que
In a situation where the consultant is personally necessary, is there any way to ensure that the consultant has to follow the same rules as a public servant? And how would you put those rules in place?
So what little knowledge I have is, yes, it is possible. It is possible to put contract language in that says you must have certain bilingual, certain number of females, certain number of people with color. I know that in the U.S., their contracts, when they hire contracts, they must pay the same wage. Like there are wage restraints that they have to mimic the amount.
I'm afraid I have to cut you off there, Ms. Carr. We're at our 6 minutes. Maybe you can finish it in a written submission to the committee. Or
great.
You can finish it with Mr. Johns' time. Go ahead for 6 minutes, Mr. Johns.
Well, first I want to thank you for your loyalty to so many public servants who we can really trust with the responsibility of delivering, services to Canadians and carrying that out. Now, we just heard Ms. Carr from, I'm not going to make a lot of friends around this table right now, but from the Liberals that, that the McKinsey outsourcing went from $2 million to $100 million, and it was cited as not a lot of money comparing to the scope of things. Now, I guess when it's $15 billion in outsourcing, they could try to say that. But to me, based on the average government worker at $79,470, that's 1,258 FTEs. Can you talk about how the morale of the public service is when they hear that from government?
Well, again, I'll reiterate that it is very disheartening from a federal sector worker when we see that the over-reliance on the outsourcing, fails to deliver value for money, and it hurts, the government's own ability to recruit professionals that they need. There's no sense to pay outside agencies market rates, but not your own government professionals. When we fall behind on compensation, recruitment, retention becomes very difficult. And so we need to defer to this committee to look at that relationship with these companies. Why is it okay to pay market rate plus, inflation plus and the overhead plus that to an outsource instead of your own public servants who are willing and capable to do that work on behalf of Canadians?
No, I really appreciate, that you talked about some of the past mistakes. The Phoenix pay system, which was supposed to save, over $80 million a year and has cost us over $2 billion. This was started by the Conservatives, who also cut Veterans Affairs. A third of Veterans Affairs meant to use technology to speed up disability applications, which the Auditor General made very clear that this was a direct relation, the job cuts, to service delivery and the application wait times, which ended up, being, leading to lapsed spending, money that should have gone to veterans. Can you tell me the morale of the public service when people can't get paid because of outsourcing, when they see people that have put their lives on the line and they're not getting the benefits because it's been outsourced or service cuts to serve the people that fight for our democracy?
I have to say that the federal public service is a calling. It always has been. We put up with a lot of things because we see value in the work that we do on behalf of Canadians. So when our hands are tied, say, for example, with the Phoenix pay system, we have IT workers who could go in and help and fix it, but we can't do anything about it. We have to be at the table. We have to be a part of the decisions to say that this is work that needs to be outsourced, or this is work that can be done in-house if you give us proper resourcing and proper staffing levels in order to do it on behalf of Canadians and on the best value for Canadians.
He asked you an excellent question around making sure that the government, is it actually paying market rate, for consultants? And you talked about plus markup for these services. When you say markup, that's profit. Is that correct?
It is. So what I could say is, I mean, we've been talking about IT contracts here, but I also represent federal nurses who are seeing an over-reliance on agencies where they are getting 3.5 times the amount of a public servant and having flexibility and not going into dangerous situations, being paid bonuses to work on Christmas Eve and other kind of incentives. Whereas if the government would just invest in proper compensation and recognition, we wouldn't have to rely on outside staff to fill these jobs.
Do you have any idea of the markup of these percentages that companies are getting, or how much is flowing to CEOs that are profiting? You know, there's a markup on top of the markup for some of these consultants to use subcontractors. Can you speak about how that morale impacts your workers?
So I definitely can talk about the morale. You know, when you have a professional, I'll use the nurses in this case, that are fully licensed, watching an agency paramedic come in who doesn't have any licensing, making 3 times the amount that they do. It's just, where do you go? The capacity to, I guess, absorb that my employer really doesn't care about my work. It's more about, you know, having a body in that, not the role that they take. Now for the markups and stuff, I'm not sure, Jordan, have we looked at any of those, or is that anything that's available in the public disclosures?
You'll have to provide a short
not.
answer, please.
Yeah, no problem. That's really easy because the answer is no. There's no indication of that. We've tried to track down that information.
I have a very quick question.
Perfect.
You know, you talked about the shadow public service. We've got Dominic Barton coming on Wednesday, I guess a former minister of the shadow public service. Is there any other former minister CEOs that you'd like to see this committee bring to questioning?
Not that I can think of, sorry.
Thanks.
Okay, we're going to have to finish there. Thank you, Mr. Johns. Over to you, Mrs. Block, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And in taking a look at the time, I think I really just have one quick question for our witnesses. Thank you for coming today. You provided us with some reports, and in those reports, you raised concerns about insufficient efforts in regards to staffing. And do you have concerns that due to the ongoing contracts or the ongoing sole sourcing, certain positions are then not being filled? So it's a rather vicious cycle.
It is definitely a vicious cycle. It feeds on itself. You know, if we don't invest in-house, we see federal public servants who will leave to become a contractor or leave the federal public service. So then it starts that whole cycle again. And I'll use while our studies are on IT right now, it is the nurses. Nurses are walking away from working for Indigenous Services Canada or Correction Services Canada to work for the agency counterparts to make the money that they should be making right now as federal public servants and getting the respect that they deserve for the profession that they are in.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Baines, over to you, please, for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Carr and Mr. McCauley for joining us today and everything you do for the public service. In your view, do parliamentarians and the public have enough access to contracting information to make informed decisions about the suitability, scope, and value proposition of tenders?
I'm gonna put that off to Jordan. I believe the answer is no. There's not a lot, but he's my data guy. So go ahead, Jordan.
Certainly not for the general public. It's not particularly accessible. The information, like it's on the government's open data portal. You download it. It's a massive, really messy data set. I think there is a tool where you can look at individual contracts, but it's all very, it's difficult to navigate if you don't know what you're looking for. And then the information contained in the disclosed data is very lacking sometimes. We don't know there's not a lot of details. You don't know what a lot of contracts are for. You can then look up the procurement ID of the contract to get more information, but it's difficult, especially for someone like in the general public to try to navigate it.
And like, well, how can you think that what can be improved? Like, what should the federal government routinely make public?
I think they could want to have maybe tighter standards on the data releases, and I think that they are getting better. As the individual in the last meeting pointed to, after 2017, the data is certainly improving. But a more clear description of what the contract is for. Sometimes those fields are just kind of filled out optionally. They typically include their kind of broad category, but like as far, you can't drill down further than knowing it's an IT consulting contract in some cases. You don't know that it's for providing, X or Y service. We don't know how many consultants are hired within a consulting contract. And that's something that we'd be really interested in looking at, because so a 10, 20 million, $100 million IT consulting contract will go to a large firm. We don't know how many consultants that then got us. We don't know how much those consultants were paid. We don't know if the contract was subcontracted. So all of those things I think would be really interesting to see.
Okay,
yes.
and just something you alluded to, we've heard a lot about IT, and it's clear that the focus is on a lot of IT workers. And I think we also realize that there's a narrow pool of of this skill set of people that are available, and we've talked a lot about salaries. So if now, say, government comes in and increases the salaries, and then there's a competition for these same pool of IT people, and private firms then again will increase salaries. So does that not compound the problem? What are some things that we can do there?
So to that question, it's very hard for us to see sometimes how much they are actually paying their IT workers. When you're talking about multinational corporations, we're not sure that even the workers that they have are being paid a similar wage, especially if they're not Canadian workers. The other thing is that, we don't know what the markup is in terms of the contract. So it's very hard for us to disclose or to understand the full scope. But what we do know is that, repeated, I would call microaggressions against the employees, not being able to be paid, not being able to work in your expertise, not being able to upskill. This is not a static job. It's not something that stays. You need to be up on the new technologies, and you have to know what you're doing. And if the government won't invest in that, then you are not able to provide the best service on behalf of Canadians.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have for today. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mr. Baines. Ms. Vanola, for 2.5 minutes. We're going to keep both of you to exactly 2.5, please.
Thank you very much. Ms. Carr, I do have a question and a comment. The phrase I've heard the most often when people were being asked questions about having details on contracts, their answer was, "I don't know." And I think that's a problem. Here's my question, though. Amongst all your members, how many of them earn $1,500 an hour, including benefits?
Question, but I can certainly get that to you after the fact. The average worker is not making that much.
The average worker has a salary of, what would you say, approximately?
Average IT worker, I think it's 76,000. Yeah, I believe it's 76,000 a year.
So to draw a comparison, I'd have to do 1,500 by 7.5 hours, and that would give me the difference as to what our public service earn as compared to a contractor. I thank you, but I agree with you. I don't think that there is any public servant that earns $1,500 an hour.
Mr. Johns? 2.5 minutes, please.
Okay, great. Now, you talked about, Ms. Carr, about nurses working alongside their colleagues that are getting paid 3 times as much private sector nurses. You know, we're hearing about the nurse shortage and doctor shortage and healthcare worker shortage in the public sector. Can you speak about how many nurses the public sector has lost to the private sector, and how critical it is to immediately put a stop to it, given the crisis, the health crisis that we're in?
So I can't say numbers. I can say with Indigenous Services Canada in Manitoba, we have a 60% vacancy rate at the moment for nurses. And overall, it's about a 50% vacancy rate for Indigenous Services Canada. So it is highly alarming, the amount of vacancies that we have that are being staffed or not being staffed. And when they are staffed, it's agency workers who are making, like I said, a good 3.5, if not more, plus bonuses, plus travel, plus they get their paycheck on time, which is again a big draw.
Just speak about how serious the threat is, like to our universal public healthcare system.
It's basically federalized. It's privatizing the federal care that we give to our members in remote and isolated communities, First Nations. So it is a crisis. It is of its own volition too, because we are not recognizing the value that these public servants bring to the table, meeting the compensation. For example, federal nurses and federal medical professionals did not receive any hazard pay over the crisis, the COVID crisis, where their counterparts were getting bonuses.
30 seconds, Mr. Jones.
I guess just in terms of the impact on what needs to be done to ensure that this stops immediately.
So, well, one is that we have to fix the Phoenix pay system. It's still a boondoggle in my mind. We need to be able to pay fair wages, and we're not looking for abundance and to be the best paid, but we need to have fair compensation. We need to have recognition in terms of that should be the government's goal to rely on hiring good public service professionals to do these jobs on behalf of Canadians, and the reliance should not be on going outside all the time because it just creates a vicious circle that never ends.
Thank you very much, Ms. Carr. Thank you again for joining us. Mr. McCauley, always a pleasure. Thanks.
Thank you.
I've got about 10. I'll excuse the two of you. Thank you again for joining us. Appreciate the input. I just have some housekeeping items we'll go over hopefully very quickly. The first, I'll just seek unanimous consent or the will of the committee. The GC strategies documents that arrived were missing what I believe were some of the documents, which were the invoices we asked for. CBSA provided them, but GC didn't. So I'm going to ask the will of the committee to have the chair write to them and provide them to us. And it'll be the same way as before. We will get the unredacted versions and the redacted ones. Once they go through proper process, will then be posted publicly. We're fine with that? Perfect. We received some late documents on the Governor General travel expenditures. You would have seen them. They would have come to you from D&D, RCMP, and Global Affairs. It wasn't much. Just looking for will the committee to publish them like we published the other big bulk. Perfect. And the last one is the McKinsey letter that everyone saw that came from McKinsey making two requests, production of papers on a rolling basis, and then wanting to discuss the confidentiality protections. As the chair, I will just opine quickly that I believe the motion was very clear what the will of the committee was on that. But I will seek guidance from the committee whether we should stick to the 5 weeks as we requested or allow them a rolling document production as they have them available. And then whether we wish to discuss allowing them confidentiality protections. Again, not what the motion is calling for. Mr. Housefather, go ahead.
Thanks. Two things. Number one, I think a rolling production is fine, provided they provide it by the deadline. Rolling production is actually better, so they can translate stuff on the way.
I think they're asking after the 5
I understand,
period.
but rolling is good. I think the deadline is the deadline. But on the second part, again, I've mentioned this before. I do think there is a fair expectation of any private concern of confidentiality with respect to information that could be in documents we have not seen. There could be trade secret protections. There could be all kinds of things. I think this committee should undertake to review the documents carefully and to reasonably consider any requests they make. But we will not guarantee any such requests, but we should take them seriously because that's only fair. And so I wouldn't make any promises, but I would say that the committee will, if they make a list of things that they want us to consider, we would consider them. I think that would be fair, Mr. Chair, to give you that power to discuss that.
That is one option. We can, through the committee, write to them asking them for more specific what they're asking for and have them get back to us. But again, I'll leave it up to the committee. Ms. Cusi.
Yeah, I can understand what Mr. Housefather is saying. That too, I don't mind your idea of asking for more specification as to what they could potentially be referring to. But I have two thoughts. The first is that the purpose of the study and the letter, as brought forward by the majority of members of this committee, was to bring to light and to have transparency as to the full work of McKinsey, so that we could sort of better understand and evaluate their role in concert with our government. And secondly, which I guess builds upon the first, is that I don't think any of my colleagues on this side of the table would accept any type of attempt to hide information from this committee or not be completely transparent where there is not a very good reason that warrants not sharing that information with us. So I'm open to your suggestion, Mr. Housefather's suggestion, of a list of where that might conclude. But I'm skeptical. I'll say that up front, and I think it would have to be very good reasoning. And if I may say, Mr. Chair, this is not the first time that McKinsey has done this. On page 59 of When McKinsey Comes to Town, a consultant group, Missouri Healthcare for All, also had questions about McKinsey. We cannot know if McKinsey has any conflicts of interest because we don't know who all their current clients are, the group wrote. So it seems to me as though they have a history of not wanting to be forthright with their client information. And as I said, if there are legitimate concerns, the safety of individuals, true national security interests, I'm open to evaluating that, but certainly not anything where this committee, as a body of the people, should have full access to the information for the purpose of our study. Thank you.
I was Mrs. Vignola and then Mr. Housefather.
Rapidement.
Very quickly. Perhaps, if memory serves me well, but maybe not, you never know. At GC Strategies, we asked for documents, and there was some concern about confidentiality. For pure documents, we said we don't put them online. We will only put online those documents that have been redacted. So there's no personal information about people that would appear. So here's my question. Why can't we do the same thing with McKinsey? We see the information, the pure information, but what we put online is the document that has been redacted, where there would be no personal information. So we do the same thing for McKinsey as we did for GC Strategies. We have the information, but the public will see important but not personal information.
In a moment, but I think perhaps for issues of conflict of interest, if there are things like that, that should be public. But I'll go to Mr. Hostfather, but before I go to you again, I'll interrupt. If perhaps the committee wishes, seems a bit of a will, we can contact McKinsey, ask them for more specifics, have them get back to us by next Monday's meeting. So at least we can decide then. But go ahead, Mr. Hostfather.
I just want to say it in English because I quite agree. And that's what I was, in fact, trying to suggest.
That the committee wouldn't get the information. The committee should get everything we asked for. But what they may be saying, and what I think they're saying, is they don't want it to be in the public domain. And I think that's perfectly legitimate, that email addresses, cell phone numbers, certain things that they may have in there should not be in the public domain. So we haven't seen it yet. But what I was suggesting is that we should see everything, and then we'll reasonably consider all of the requests they make based on what we see in the documents. So I think we should get everything, but I just think we should not automatically say everything is going to be made public, because of course there may be things in there like private information that shouldn't be. That's all I was suggesting, Mr. Chair. So anyways, I support your request.
Ms. Block?
Could we handle it the same way we handled the information that we received from GC Strategies? Is that in fact what you are suggesting, Mr. Hostfather?
What I'm suggesting is that I don't know exactly what they're going to request, but there may be things, like I said, that are beyond just the emails and phone numbers, and we'd have to consider them as a group once we've read the documents and see, are they truly trade secret? For example, if they have a trade secret in there, we should not make that public. That is not fair. But if they're just saying, oh, we don't want to be embarrassed because of this, well, that's ridiculous. And so I think we need to understand their objections, and we definitely need to get everything. But I think we should take the objections that they have and talk about them as a group before we automatically say everything goes public.
Yeah, it almost
but generally, yes.
Yeah, it almost sounds like a choice of two. We can write to them now asking for them to be more specific of what these privilege issues are, or the other option is say, give us everything and we'll decide later. Is there a preference of the two? Go ahead, Ms. Block.
I like the second one, where we ask them to send us all the things that we've asked for, and then we take that opportunity to determine.
Yes, this is exactly what I'm saying. I agree. I think you should ask them, Mr. Chair, for precision. Say, we're going to look at everything. We want it unredacted to the committee. But if you make a very specific list of all the things you want to be redacted, we will reasonably consider them as a group and we will get back to you. But you still need to give us, under our powers, the documents that we requested.
Are we comfortable with that? I think we have our marching orders. Real quickly, because I'm trying to get out. Work schedule, we're going to try and organize, although it's very difficult with everyone's schedule, a working committee, a subcommittee. But right now, because of difficulty with witnesses, juggling ministers, we're going to try and fill the February calendar with this study. Then we'll have the estimates popping in. But in the meantime, we'll work toward that. And if something else is more important comes up, we will handle that. The trip, we'll discuss. I texted everyone. There's the ever outstanding shipbuilding trip. I think the Conservative side is checking whether they will consider travel during a sitting week. I don't have any indication from the Liberal side if there's a desire to continue the trip, or my Conservative colleagues if there's a desire to do the trip. So I would ask, Conservative side is going to see, I believe, if they will allow sitting week travel. I don't think there's a desire for non-sitting week travel because of Mr. Johns' schedule. It's unfortunate. It's just the reality of Mr. Johns' schedule and the fairness of him living in a very difficult to get to part. But I'll ask each party to go back to their whips to see what their decisions are, and then we'll spend a few minutes Wednesday at the, if I could just have the floor, at the very least, we do have an existing budget from last time. February 8th is our drop dead date for submitting it. I would suggest that we at least submit it as an interest from the committee, and then if the parties have other plans for our time, so be it, but we don't want to miss the February 8th cutoff. I know there is strong desire from Mrs. Vinola to do it, and it is probably going to be $300 to $400 billion over the next 20 years. So I think there is some value, and I've been to them several times. There is a lot of value to it, but we'll leave it at that. Everyone, thank you for bearing with me for this. I appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you, and we are adjourned.